Good afternoon and welcome to the Full Scottish on this, the 15th of December. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, and those regular viewers will know that the Full Scottish is broadcasting Scotland's look back on the headlines of the last 7 days. To look beyond the headlines and explore the stories in a little more depth, I'm happy to welcome two guests this morning. The first is Stuart McMillan, MSP, a regional list MSP since 2007, and since 2016, the constituency MSP for Greenock and Inverclyde. Despite his considerable political experience, I have to admit that I'm even more impressed by the fact that he's the Parliament's official piper and that he raised money for charity by playing at all 42 senior football grounds in Scotland. Welcome, Stuart.
Thanks very much, Douglas. Thank you.
My second guest today is a welcome voice from Wales, a regular on the programme, Hugh Marshall of Talking Wales.
Hello,
welcome
how are you?
We start today, as we always do, with the update from Ukraine on this day 1026 since the full-scale invasion of the country by Russia. Russia has begun using North Korean troops in significant numbers for the first time to conduct assaults on Ukrainian forces battling to hold territory in Russia's Kursk region, President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Saturday. Today, we already have preliminary data that the Russians have begun to use North Korean soldiers in their assaults. A significant number of them, Zelensky told Ukrainians in his daily wartime address. The North Koreans were being used in combined Russian units and only on the Kursk front for now, he said, adding, "We have information suggesting their use could extend to other parts of the front line." North Korean soldiers had not so far entered the fight on Ukrainian soil, but were already taking noticeable losses. The Ukrainian president said the more active use of the troops was a new escalation and called for a global response, as Donald Trump's return to the White House next month fuels speculation of a push for peace talks. Zelensky issued the fresh appeal to Ukraine's Western allies to strengthen their support for Kyiv, saying that he would discuss it with European partners next week. Ukrainian air defences destroyed 56 out of 108 drones launched by Russia during strikes overnight, Kyiv's military said today. Another 49 were locationally lost, typically a result of electronic jamming. Debris damaged an unspecified piece of infrastructure, as well as apartment buildings and homes, the Air Force said. This morning, Russia's defense ministry claimed Russia's air defense systems destroyed 15 Ukrainian drones overnight. 13 of the drones were downed over the Black Sea and one each over the Russian border regions of Kursk and Belgorod. Ukraine's general staff reported a significant increase in the number of Russian assaults on the Kursk front, along with airstrikes, glide bomb raids, and more than 200 artillery attacks. Andrei Kovalenko, an official at Ukraine's National Security and Defense Council, said the North Koreans had taken losses, but he provided no numbers. Ukrainian drones carried out an overnight attack on an oil facility in Russia's Oryol region that is a crucial source of fuel supplies for Russian troops, Ukraine's military said on Saturday. Russian authorities said their firefighters were battling a blaze in the western Oryol region caused by a drone attack. The Oryol region neighbours Russia's Kursk region. The Ukrainian strikes came a day after Russia fired 93 cruise and ballistic missiles and almost 200 drones at Ukraine in further attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure. A former FBI informant accused of falsely claiming that Joe Biden and the president's son Hunter had accepted Ukrainian bribes has agreed to plead guilty to federal charges, according to court papers. As part of the plea deal, Alexander Smirnov will admit he fabricated the story that became central to a Republican impeachment inquiry in Congress. He was accused of falsely reporting to the FBI in June 2020 that executives associated with the Ukrainian energy company Burisma paid Hunter Biden and Joe Biden $5 million each in 2015 or 2016. Ukraine's air defences shot down 58 of 132 Russian drones, launched in an overnight attack, the Ukrainian Air Force said on Saturday. It said 72 drones were lost due to the use of electronic warfare. There were no immediate reports of major damage. Russia's military said on Saturday that it had downed 60 drones overnight. In Russia's Belgorod region, which borders Ukraine, a drone attack killed a 9-year-old boy and wounded his mother and baby sister, said the governor Vyacheslav Gladkov. Well, this week in Ukraine, we've seen more small gains in the east for Russia. We've also seen Ukraine using long-distance drones. Apparently, there was a strike in Grozny, 700 miles away from the nearest piece of Ukrainian territory overnight. But most of the talking about the future of Ukraine is being done by people who are not Ukrainian. Kellogg, the appointed peace envoy for Trump, or Macron talking about French troops possibly being used as peacekeepers. Are we getting away from the principle of no deals for Ukraine without Ukrainians? Stuart, would you like to comment first?
To be honest, I really don't know what the future is now going to hold. Also, with a new president coming to the US in January, and also we see the daily updates happening in the media with what's happening over in Ukraine. I think it's fair to say the situation is now probably a lot more fluid as compared to what it has been over the course of the last 2 years. I just get the impression now that that Western countries are just looking for a way out, whatever that way is going to be. Notwithstanding the fact, also, resources are still going into Ukraine to assist the Ukrainian military. But I feel as if there's now some type of end game is being sought quicker as compared to the past.
Thank you. Hugh, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is, and I think what's happened in Syria this week has shown that Russia is weakened militarily. It hasn't been a good week for Putin because obviously, with Syria, he was hoping, he was having influence in the Middle East, and the fact that they didn't have the capacity to support and help the regime to stay in power. I think again gives us potential hope for the future, because I think he probably will be using even though Assad is there having being given immunity and sort of sanctuary in Russia, he'll probably use him as a bargaining tool. And I think the whole conversation now, Ukraine, and the rest of Russia, what the future of Russia is going to be called into question, because it's clear the fact that he's using North Korean troops and is reliant on sort of Iran and North Korea for their continued war, I think speaks volumes.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting point. Add to the military problems, the economic problems in Russia, which have been highlighted this week, and their ever increasing interest rate. And there seems to be a stop now to people saying after Syria, every war ends with a negotiated settlement, that it is possible for Russia to be defeated. Speaking about Syria, we turn now to Gaza in the Middle East. At least 44,930 Palestinians have been killed and 106,624 wounded in Gaza since 7th of October 2023. And more than 4,047 have been killed and 16,638 wounded in Lebanon. Well, the media focus this week has obviously switched to Syria, but Israeli airstrikes in Gaza continue. Now, I'm sure Mr. Biden would like to end his presidency with some kind of solution for the Middle East. Do you think there's a chance of a ceasefire in Gaza in the near future, even a temporary one? Stuart?
Douglas, it's a very good question, and I genuinely don't know, to be quite honest. I think the Syria situation and the pace of what's happened in Syria, certainly it clearly took the Syrian regime by surprise, but I think it's obviously taken the West and the Middle East by surprise as well. And I think it's certainly throughout the week we saw the reports as well of the Israeli military going into the Golan Heights and taking additional land there as well. So I'm not confident that there'll be some type of ceasefire, permanent or temporary, before Christmas or before the end of the year. I would like to think it could happen, but I'm not confident it will. And I think because the Syria situation is so new, it's so fresh, and I think there's still a lot of uncertainty, huge amount of uncertainty as to what the future of Syria is going to hold, and also the knock-on effect that's going to have for other countries and territories within the Middle East.
Yeah, thank you, Hugh. Your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a hopeless situation whilst Netanyahu is there. It's the situation going to continue. It was interesting again, touching on Syria, the fact that as soon as Assad fell, Israel were into Syria. Again using the guise of being able to defend themselves. They made sort of an incursion into Syria to attack targets, and they're basically just doing what they want. And other governments in the world have no influence. And Netanyahu, he's not gonna, he's doing it in order to keep himself in power. You would hope that what's happened in Syria, with a certain amount of it, with people sort of uprising, that people of Israel at some point will get fed up with Netanyahu and sort of get him out. But no, it's disappointing, and I feel for those people, especially at this time of year when we're celebrating, sort of Christmas that has its roots in that exact location, and there's going to be lots of people suffering needlessly this Christmas in the Middle East.
Yeah, temporary ceasefire is obviously not going to do very much good for 2 weeks, 6 weeks, whatever. The thoughts in the West or the North, however we categorize the area, has always been for a lasting two-state solution, but that seems impossible. Both Netanyahu and Hamas are opposed to a two-state solution, whereas Fatah and the West Bank are in favor of it. And even to the extent, I don't know if you're aware of the book by Adam Raz, an Israeli scholar, who wrote The Road to October the 7th, which was published in May this year. And he detailed how Netanyahu was responsible for funneling Qatari money to Hamas to make sure that, first of all, that they're split from Fatah, and also that their opposition to a two-state solution is upheld. So do we need to look at something else other than two-state solution, or do we just have to wait it out until Netanyahu goes? Stuart?
Well, I think the two-state solution is something that is widely recognised and supported by many countries and certain politicians and wider societies. So, I personally think a two-state solution is it's the only way to guarantee any kind of lasting peace. But before we get to that, obviously, Netanyahu has been commented on already, but I think the fact that even past leaders of Israel, who were probably considered, some will have been considered to be a bit more moderate as compared to Netanyahu, couldn't get to a place of a two-state solution. I sadly think there will be a lot more bloodshed, a lot more lives lost before we get to the point of having a two-state solution. But I have long since held the belief that a two-state solution is the only way to to have the hope for peace within the Middle East.
Yeah, it does seem to be the view of everyone on the outside, but not the main protagonists at the moment. Hugh, have you anything to add on that?
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with what Stuart was saying. Whilst Netanyahu is there, but I think what's happening now is just making the possibility of a two-state solution, especially in the next 4 years with Trump in power, increasingly difficult. It's hard to see. Israel, Jewish settlers are still, sort of moving into, going into Palestinians' territories and taking their homes. And there's a substantial chunk of Israeli society who, only believe in one state and don't want to see the Palestinians have any recognition. So, yeah, again, it's incredibly sad, it's just heartbreaking. It's just so difficult. And I remember, I grew up at the time when the United Nations had power. When the United Nations said and did things, it meant something. It's just become an empty vessel now. And the power you can see is the fact that Russia have got a seat at the table of the United Nations while they're actually sort of at war, invading Ukraine, and getting support from Iran and North Korea. It does make you worry about the world order as we go ahead of the next few years.
Yeah, thank you. A gloomy view, as it has been every Sunday when we've discussed it on this programme. Turning now to the United Kingdom, and an opinion poll this week showed Reform 1% behind Labour and ahead of the Conservatives in voting intentions. Both Labour and the Conservatives have tried to tackle reform on their own ground in areas like immigration. But political research tends to show that adopting more moderate versions of the policies of the far right only validates the far right agenda. So can either the Labour or the Tories defeat reform and the far right by adopting their policies in some form? Stuart?
So, this is a hugely interesting debate, I would say. So Scotland is quite different from elsewhere. I mean, I think that opinion poll that you referenced, I think the numbers of Scotland were a lot less as compared to down south. So I think the debate's got to be looked upon, in my opinion, it's got to be looked upon from each of the 4 different nations currently within the UK. So from a Scottish perspective, we had a by-election in Gourock, a council by-election recently, and there's obviously a number of council by-elections across Scotland. Reform clearly are picking up some support, and some of the support will be disaffected people from voting from other parties to go to them. I think to attempt to take them on their ground, on their territory, I think would be foolish for any political party. What I think all the mainstream political parties should be attempting to do is to, first of all, try and get their message out, whatever that message may be. Try and get the message out, but also try and do it in a way that it's try and bring in, in my opinion, try and bring in a bit less confrontation. So I think if that might be a step forward to trying to nullify some of the extreme rhetoric that we do hear from Reform. Because their message is very, very simple, and we know what it is. And we know what that dog whistle politics is like. And certainly, I think certainly when you kind of look back to the week that we just had in the debate in the Scottish Parliament on Wednesday, all the parties could have had something to challenge. They could have said a lot of things to challenge the Scottish Government on the budget. I mean, every budget process, I know we're going to come on to that, but every budget process is there to be challenged. But the fact that the Tories had in their motion the line that they had, pitting asylum seekers against pensioners, I just thought it was crass in the extreme. And I know there were Scottish Tory MSPs who were embarrassed that was in the motion, and they were embarrassed about what happened. But they also know that's now the language that's going to be utilised, and they're going to be thrown back against their party because of that one stupid mistake, I would suggest. And if this is the way that the Tories are going to act in the Scottish Parliament going forward, then I think it probably highlights, in my opinion, it probably highlights how scared they actually are of the far right in Scotland.
I was saying with you for a moment that you mentioning that there are different views in the four home nations. The opinion poll about 2 weeks ago suggested that in the next Holyrood election there could be as many as 11 Reform MSPs in the Parliament, which seems to me quite amazing given that Reform has never produced a policy document for Scotland. I don't know, perhaps you know, whether they even believe that there should be a Scottish Parliament. So it seemed really odd to me that there was this support.
Well, certainly over the course of the by-election, there were a few people whose doors I knocked, folk who were supportive, and I didn't identify a lot of folk who were supportive, but clearly when it came to the voting, but they still came 5th out of 5 candidates. But for some, I think they clearly weren't SNP voters beforehand, because some were really kind of anti the Parliament anyway. So, and I've read differing things and heard differing things that they don't really have a consistent approach or policy with regards to should the Scottish Parliament actually exist or not. But irrespective, I mean, certainly Reform in its previous guises didn't agree with the EU, and they still put candidates up for the European parliamentary elections in the past. So whether they believe in something or not, believe in the existence of something or not, they will utilise, if they get elected, they will utilise funding that comes along from that body to pursue their particular agenda.
Thank you. Turning to you now, Hugh. I don't know, what's the strength of Reform in Wales?
It's that they're becoming increasingly strong. We had an opinion poll out in Wales some 2 weeks ago, which was heartening for Plaid Cymru. It put Plaid Cymru ahead of Labour for the first time in many years. Plaid Cymru were on 24%, up 1%. Labour were down to 23%, down 4% from the previous one, but Reform were up to 23% level with Labour up 5%. With the Conservatives on 19. So with the way that the Senate elections with the new closed list system coming into force for 2026, it would make Reform the second biggest party in the Senate. Labour would have 25 seats. Reform would have 25 seats. Plaid would have 24. Conservatives 19. Lib Dems 2, and the Greens 1. So yeah, and as Stuart was saying, what's interesting is Reform. They have, they haven't been knocking on doors. They haven't got, the machinery that certainly the Labour Party have in Wales, of being out and knocking on doors. What they have is the ability to say stuff, not be challenged, and gain support for it, because people, are being fed lies, and they are lies, when it comes to immigration. And people are sort of picking up on that and thinking that the reason that their cost of living, their shopping has gone up, the fact that they can't afford things that they used to be able to afford, is because people are coming into the UK in small boats. Whereas immigration, the reality is it's something like 4% of the total numbers, and the majority of people coming here are coming here to work because we haven't got enough people to fill those jobs and to study. So again, adding to the UK economy. So it just really isn't helping when you've got, Labour trying to show that, they're being tough on immigration rather than having an honest discussion about it. And I think that's one of the issues, again, with the media, is there's a lack of challenge. There's a lack of discussion around the actual numbers. And Reform are benefiting from it because, they're making people feel that the reason they can't get a hospital appointment or a doctor's appointment is because of a certain, sort of section of society coming into the UK in small boats. And it's absolute nonsense.
Yes, thank you. Staying with the UK politics, and this week, Angela Rayner announced her housing plans, and the UK media was full of stories about what they called the UK housing crisis, ignoring the fact that that's a devolved matter in Scotland. And also a different story in Scotland. For example, the Housing Minister Paul McMillan was in Irvine this week at the sod cutting for 200 affordable homes to be built on the former maternity unit at Ayrshire Central Hospital. And also, we'll come to the budget in more detail, but 200 million extra was announced for housing in that budget. So, Stuart, could you sort of outline the differences between the situation in England and Scotland when it comes to housing and building houses?
Okay, so I think first of all, I think it's useful just to put on the record that I know in my local authority area in Inverclyde, I know that there's actually a surplus of housing. So there's about 400 additional empty properties sitting in Inverclyde. Most of them are flats, and people's wants and also needs are different today compared to what they might have been 30 years, 40 years, 50 years ago. So people, certainly constituents who contact my office, they are looking for a back and front door with a garden. I'm not getting many folk coming to my office looking for a flat. So that's kind of one thing just to put on the record. But I know that Inverclyde is not alone. I think the latest figure I saw was something around about 19,000 empty properties across Scotland. But in other local authority areas, the properties might be similar to what we have. They might not be the properties that people are obviously wanting. In my area, we've got the challenge with the local housing associations because they don't want to build any more properties because they already have vacant properties they want to let. So this isn't just a new thing; it's been something for the last few years. So it's a continual challenge, and I've had some dialogue with the local authority on this matter too, because they also are frustrated because of the needs and the wants and the requirements of people who need properties. One of the things that really kind of struck me about the announcement this week, certainly from the UK government, was just about build, and I think build on greenbelt land. Now, I remember kind of going back many years ago when Tony Blair was the Prime Minister, and there was this kind of house building boom. But building on land that was actually considered beforehand as a floodplain. Now, we know in terms of climate change, we know that in terms of the amount of rainfall that we're getting, not just in Scotland, but UK-wide, that floodplains are going to become even more important. So I would urge caution. By all means, more properties are required, but it's about getting the correct properties for the correct locations, as compared to just building when you see a bit of land, let's go and build something on it. Actually, there has to be a more considered approach to providing the accommodation, providing the housing that's required. Otherwise, it just then stokes up even more problems, which then has even more cost onto the taxpayer to try to fix a problem that actually might not have been an issue if the correct consideration was undertaken at the very beginning of the process.
Thank you. Hugh, forgive my ignorance. I don't know if housing is fully devolved in Wales, but I mean, I do remember back to my childhood the rumpus about holiday homes in Wales preventing local people finding accommodation. What is the situation nowadays?
Yeah, it's a similar situation. That there's been a lot of work going on from Welsh Government with support with Plaid Cymru and Lib Dem supporting Labour. We're trying to get a new sort of policy on housing, especially in West Wales, where holiday homes, Airbnbs have seen sort of decimation of lots of communities, and it's had a direct impact on the value of properties. So, we have a problem in Wales where those areas where people want to retire to, those house prices are becoming very expensive. Young people, there's few opportunities to work in those communities, so they're leaving those communities. So it's having a double impact. So, where those areas are seeing more pressures on health and social care, because obviously the population is getting older. Younger people are leaving. They're moving to the cities, or they're even sort of moving from Wales. But I think one of the big issues with housing in Wales is since the sort of evolution of housing associations taking over from local authorities. So, and I think, the fact that not enough social housing is being built. I remember, I grew up in a village called Gwynfryn outside Wrexham, and there was a small estate of council houses there. So we forget that, that in the sort of 50s, well, after the war and through the 50s, 60s and into the 70s, sort of every village would have, a small council house estate or a row of council houses built. And we just haven't seen that happen for many years. And, sort of Labour have this plan to build 1.5 million houses in England, during the term of the next government. And it's just completely, unachievable. There isn't enough, I know they want to sort of reform planning, but there just isn't enough builders to do the work. So again, why isn't this being passed back to local government? Why aren't we building more council houses? So yeah, it's a difficult situation. But again, Steve was saying, in places like where I live now, in one of the old coal mining valleys in South Wales, there's lots of empty properties, that have fallen into disrepair, that could be brought back into use. So, I think, there are steps we can be taking to increase housing stock within our communities without having to build new housing estates, and which is what's happening on the outskirts of towns. And it's an economic issue as well, because obviously, if you've got these housing estates, where are these people working? They tend to be commuting to other areas. And I think the fact that more people are able to work from home now is having a difference as well. So, sort of local development plans that were developed, 5-6 years ago, they're no longer fit for purpose. So yeah, no, it's very complicated. And again, the media isn't explaining enough as to why there is a shortage, where the shortages are, because what you'll get is Reform again jumping on the bandwagon and saying you can't get a house because of who.
Yeah, tackling the problem is obviously difficult. There were a lot of comments on social media this week saying, "Oh, these empty properties, if they're second homes, then double the council tax, triple the council tax." And I did read an article in the Sunday Times a month or so back about a town in Wales which had tripled the council tax. And what had happened was that the businesses in the town, restaurants and bars, were complaining about the loss of revenue because the people decided no, it wasn't worth the while coming there as a holiday home, and put them on the market. And these are expensive houses, so it's not really providing anything useful for the local community. Is that a solution, using council tax as a weapon? As that was an example from Wales. Your thoughts?
Yeah, that's something, and again, it's something that is popular with people in Wales, because again, they've changed legislation now. So with holiday homes, you have to have occupancy for over, I think it's about 180 days a year, because unless you get that, then you are going to get clobbered. And houses, these are houses in communities where people want to live, and people can't live there because A, the properties aren't available, and B, they're too expensive. And yes, it might have an impact on tourism in the short term. But remember, a lot of these people just come for weekends. A lot of them bring their own shopping and stuff with them. So I think the fact that local businesses are saying it's going to impact them. Yeah, there will be some impact, but hopefully, the increased money they get from council tax returns will mean they can invest in those economies and start creating better jobs, so people can be reliant on better jobs rather than seasonal ones linked to tourism.
Okay, thank you. Well, I dare say we'll cover council tax in Scotland when speaking about the budget, which is our next topic. The Scottish budget, and Anna Sauer found himself voting with the Tories against a government budget motion on winter fuel payments and abolishing the two-child cap in Scotland. His party, the Labour Party, abstained, and Mr. Sauer said his vote was an error. But no matter, the Scottish Government needs to build a consensus or sufficient number of abstainers when it comes to the vote. How are things going with that, Stuart?
So I think, as I touched upon earlier, that the budget has been published, and it's now into the committees for them to scrutinise their policy areas. And I think it's fair to say that at every opportunity in the chamber, the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, Cabinet Secretaries and Ministers taking the opportunity to highlight what the budget is going to offer, and also if people actually want that additional investment to go in, then they have to vote for the budget. It's as simple as that. We are a parliament of minorities, and we don't have the numbers to get the budget through ourselves. So there has to be some type of engagement with the other parties. Now, the First Minister, Deputy First Minister and Finance Secretary they've already indicated in terms of the meetings that have taken place beforehand, and also the door is always open to have further dialogue going forward. And that's the right thing to do. So it's an interesting chamber. It's an interesting parliament at the moment. And it kind of takes me back to that first session of Parliament where it was a Parliament very much of minorities, and the horse trading that was taking place between the SNP government and other parties to get budgets through, and also other legislation as well. But fundamentally, this budget offers £2 billion extra into the NHS to take the budget up to £21 billion, and an extra £1 billion into local government to take it up to £15 billion, amongst many other of the announcements. So it's a good budget. It's an excellent budget, and if the opposition parties want additional investment to go in to the public services that they claim that they want, apart from the Tories, of course, their letter to the First Minister indicated was £1 billion of savings. We need to invest in public services. We've had 14 years of Tory austerity, and I see it with the constituents that I deal with throughout the week, every single week, how the 14 years of austerity has hampered my constituency and hampered many of my constituents, and I'm not alone in that. This is an opportunity to actually to try to repair some of those issues that have happened over the last 14 years, but there's still a long way to go.
Looking from the outside, it does seem a little hard to vote against the budget, given that COSLA has got what it wants, that more money going to local councils, also the cap on council tax being lifted, although with the warning, don't expect high increases in council tax. Anna Sauer has often spoken about money for the NHS. There's a huge amount going into that, as you highlighted. Even critics of the SNP, Glenn Campbell, in an opinion piece for for the BBC had to admit that it was a very politically astute budget. Can you imagine anyone other than the Tories voting against it?
Well, it's there's a long way to go in the process. We'll find out obviously in February when the final vote takes place. I would like to think that, and you can shoot me down for what I'm about to say, that a touch of common sense actually kicks in, and but the other parties, clearly not the Tories, but the other parties actually see the situation that we have, see the opportunity that this budget offers to the people of Scotland, and that the budget gets support. That's it certainly is my hope, but also this is about delivering to the people of Scotland. So that extra $2 billion for the health and the extra $1 billion for local authorities. This is what opposition parties have been calling for some time, to get additional resource put into both. So they've been asking for it, they've been calling for it, they've been demanding it, they're now getting it. Are they really going to vote against what they've been asking for?
Yeah, thank you. Hugh, I don't expect you to be completely familiar with the Scottish budget, but you've just had the budget presented in Wales also. So
yeah.
What are your thoughts on what's happening there?
Yeah, it's interesting what Stuart was saying, because it's a different dynamic here, because obviously it's a Labour government in the Senedd in Cardiff, where obviously, Labour are happy to be able to sort of announce, additional funding that the Labour government in Westminster have done. And, in fairness, Labour at Westminster need to be congratulated for increasing that funding, because, the Tories have tried to sort of starve Wales, Scotland of money, not Northern Ireland, because obviously there were votes in that with the support from the DUP. So yeah, and I think the interesting thing now is, it does make it difficult for Plaid to vote against it. But I think the argument that Plaid Cymru are making, yes, there's additional money there, but HS2, the consequentials that Wales never received, and this week we had Lynette Morgan, the First Minister, saying that Keir Starmer is sick of her, sort of asking for the money. He's not giving her the money. They have given them some additional money, but what Plaid Cymru are saying is, well, there should be more money, and Wales needs more money, because Wales has been, sort of starved of cash over the last 15 years. This week we found out with the national insurance, rising national insurance, that hasn't been sort of factored into all the public employees in Wales, and there isn't enough money from the consequentials to cover that. So again, it's having a direct impact on Wales. But again, people, explaining the economy, explaining a budget. Again, it is a complex issue, and it's how people are able to understand it. I think that is the big challenge, moving forward. Again, we've touched on reform in the past. Reform will say this, that, and the other. They haven't got any, sort of costed figures for anything. They'll just say anything, because they've seen what happened with Trump. You can just say anything and you'll get into power. Whereas the reality is, you've got to be sensible and explain these things. But I think, there's a job to be done by all political parties in the UK to explain, what the financial situation is, and and how decisions are being made.
And do you think that the Labour Party's pitch that they're doing a great deal for Wales here is with an eye on the next Welsh Senate elections?
No, I think, again, it's interesting that, even though Labour in Wales have benefited greatly from, how Labour are performing on a UK level. They have, outperformed Labour in Wales in the past. But I think that's why Reform are doing far better in Wales now, is people are seeing Labour. And it is, quite frankly, it is ridiculous to be critical of Starmer and the Labour government, because they've been in power for, literally, a matter of months. And in fairness, they have done, a fair bit of change, and it, under challenging circumstances. So I will give credit where it's due, but the public don't seem to be seeing that. They're just, again, popularism. Social media is driving opinions and not facts, and I think that's the issue we have now. Is we're living in a post-fact apocalypse, as Trump has shown. He just lied and lied and lied, and now he's in power. He's appointing, a cabinet of billionaires. After saying he was going to drain the swamp all those years ago, he's not. It's clear they're just trying to. He's going to spend the next 4 years just lining his and his mates' pockets as much as they can. Because Trump knows, in 4 years' time, he's going to be, 84, 85? And, he just wants to sort of have a legacy for his kids. It's, again, sorry to be the, the harbinger of doom. It's just quite depressing, I think. But I think, it's something we've got to sort of get a grip of this now. Because if Reform get their foot in the door, we've seen in Wales when UKIP were in power what they offer. It's nothing. They have no policies. They don't have the capability to sort of contribute. They're just spoilers. And what Wales and Scotland needs, are people from all political parties who are working for the benefits of Scotland and here in Wales. Whereas Reform, all they're interested in is spoiling and, lining the pockets of Farage and his mates. It's worrying times, and we've got to do something about it now.
Okay, so I asked you about the election in Wales. Let's see if I get a cheerier answer from Stuart in terms of the budget in Scotland. In many ways, it seems to have shot Sarwar's fox in giving things that he's demanded, such as money for the NHS. What do you think this budget effect will be on voting intentions and ultimately the vote in the next Scottish Parliament election?
Well, obviously, I think there's been a number of opinion polls that have come out since the Scottish budget was published, and it has changed the dynamic, to say the least. The SNP support is up, Labour support is down, and there is it seems to be a lot of consideration, welcome for what the Scottish Government and the SNP are proposing. So this is at the beginning of the process. So we've still got the process to go in terms of the parliamentary committees doing their work, and then the vote in the chamber. But for me, this actually shows that when the Scottish Government get the resource, then they can put the money into the areas that need the investment. We've been starved 14 years of austerity. You consider, particularly when it comes to the capital investment, the UK is number 7 out of the G7 in terms of capital investment. So we are way behind the other countries in terms of the investment. And that's not just over the last 14 years, that's over the last 30 years. There is a huge job to be done in terms of improving the capital infrastructure in the country. And certainly, I know we're amongst friends in this programme, but attempting to do it under the auspices of the Union is always going to strangle the potential that Scotland has got. Whereas if we are an independent country, we know the challenges that are there, we know the capital investment that's required, we know the different parts of the country that need that capital investment, and we could do that as an independent country, as compared to the situation that we currently have, really waiting on an annual basis for a budget to come from London where we could take decisions ourselves.
Okay, thank you both. Now, the last item today is sadly rather parochial, and it's about us at Broadcasting Scotland. As you know, we end every news programme here with an appeal for funding for subscribers to the channel, and usually mentioning the word crisis. Well, it really is crisis now. This might be the last ever full Scottish managed from the Glasgow studio if we are unable to raise the funding to pay the bills. It's not just a problem for us, it's a problem for all independent broadcast media that is not dependent on funding from billionaire right-wing media barons, whether it be television, GB News, quite happy to run at a £40 million loss, or the press. So how can we support an independent media, and how important is an independent media? Now, I know that you've written an article on this quite recently, Hugh. You're talking about public interest journalism as a public good, and obviously your experience from Talking Wales. So, what light can you shed on this?
Yeah, it's. I don't think people realise the importance of independent media. I spent the last year. I finished last week a postgraduate certificate in innovation and leadership in journalism, and next year, hopefully, I'll be going on to study a master's and looking at the issue of, partially is how people value news services. You've got platforms like GB News, people saying, oh, they're not going to last because they're making a loss. It's owned and run by billionaires. It's not being run as a business, it's run as a propaganda tool. And the sooner people realise that, the better. But, and GB News has overtaken Sky now, Sky News as a news channel. So, there's a certain section of society who are getting their news and information from that point of view. The other issue is that, Ofcom and Reuters institutional audiences are fragmenting. Younger people are getting the news in different ways and different sources. But unless we have platforms like Broadcast Scotland, where we get to hear from politicians and people who understand policy and discuss these topics, it's not going to get into the public domain. So, there's a value beyond the actual, but the fact that we're having this discussion, and hopefully people will hear these discussions and share that information online on social media, has a huge benefit. So, I just implore people to realise, it's, you don't value it until it's gone. Get behind, sort of ventures like Broadcast Scotland, because they're doing a really, really important and a really, really difficult job. And if you think, you go into a cafe and you're spending, £4 on a coffee, every week, imagine what that money, a similar amount would do for something like Broadcast Scotland. So, I'm in Wales and, I give a monthly donation of £10 to Broadcast Scotland, because I think that it's important, not just for Scotland, but for the whole of the UK, that we have an independent media that can scrutinise and discuss politics independently.
Well, thank you, Hugh. Stuart, I've spent the last few weeks in Romania, where we had this horrific result in the first round of the presidential elections of an unknown candidate, funded with Russian money, and a campaign purely on TikTok. How do you see the situation in Scotland, where we have very few voices speaking up on Scottish issues, which are not just driven from London?
I think come back to Hugh's point about the independence of the media, it's hugely important. If we look back in history, where propaganda tools were utilised for particular purposes, and that's happened. It's happened not just in one country; it's happened elsewhere too. But in the present day, the issue of accessing information is totally different, as you touched upon. I mean, Hugh's right in terms of younger people getting their information from different sources. They're not sitting down and watching the television, watching the news and TV, as I would have done when I was younger. It is from TikTok, it's from Snapchat and YouTube and the like. So it's from different sources as compared to the past. Now, I know that the broadcast media in Scotland, they know this, because I used to be on the Culture Committee in the Parliament, and we did an inquiry a number of years ago into into the. It started off actually regarding the film sector, but it also broadened out in terms of some of the commentary that came forward. But it's hugely important to ensure that there are independent voices who are not at the behest and beholden to the billionaires. Because if we lose that opportunity of accessing information, accessing truthful information, factual information, and also kind of a different voice, if we lose that, then that doesn't present, in my opinion, doesn't present a positive outcome for wider society. Now, whether it's in a Scottish context, a UK context, a European context, I think it's all the same in terms of the importance of having independent media outlets. Because, well, we've seen how large media can help people win elections, and that's not helpful for democracy.
No, thank you. And staying on that subject, I will reiterate our appeal that we always give. At Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We set our current fundraising target in April, hoping to reach £36,000 by the end of the year. It's now December and we've only raised a little over 19,000, just over half of our target. However, to pay our bills and survive, we urgently need to raise at least 12,000 now. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around 2,500. We urgently need more regular subscribers. It stands at the moment at around 500 and we need 800. But we also need to clear our debts as well. We're at crisis point and really need your donations right now to be able to pay our bills and survive. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you very much to my guests today, Stuart McMillan, MSP, and Hugh Marshall.
Thank you.
And thank you at home or wherever you are for watching. And I hope we'll be there for you to join us during the coming week. But for me, goodbye and enjoy your Sunday.